Well, hopefully by now everyone has gotten a chance to watch the greatest animated film of the next 2 years. So now we can answer some of the most important questions without having to skirt around the good stuff. But I am gonna start with some basic personal takes. Is Across the Spider-Verse better than Into the Spider-Verse? An absolutely pointless question given how close the two are and ultimately how far above they are against all their competition. But Spider-Verse will always have the hedge of being the intro to this Spider-Man incarnation, the first use of this art style, and that its story is self-contained. And as long as Beyond the Spider-Verse is in the general ballpark of where these films are with a satisfying conclusion, this is well set to be one of the best film trilogies of all time, but at that time, Across the Spider-Verse will most likely suffer a bit from middle child syndrome, and I think probably going to be regarded as the least of the three, merely because it doesn't have a definitive ending or beginning. But what Across does have in comparison to the first is more visual and narrative ambition, allows us to explore more universes with their own styles, more intimate scenes with various characters' personal relationships, proposes some very interesting philosophical questions, and introduces us to Pav and show stealer Hobie Brown, officially making him this generation's Gollum, the breakout star of the second entry. Maybe Lando's a better comparison. And for all of the haughty expressions of "I like movies that end," it may not have a technical conclusion, but I would argue that Across the Spider-Verse has an amazing last 15 minutes. Maybe even some of the best last 15 minutes in cinema history. And pushing back against the not an ending, the entire trilogy is ultimately going to cover Miles' journey, but each movie also has a contained arc for one of his co-stars. In the first movie, it was Peter B. Parker coming to grips with his fear of the future and guiding the next generation, and for Across, it's Gwen. The expansion of Gwen's character specifically is one of Across's greatest strengths, especially for a character that I didn't feel much for in the first movie, opening with a fantastic 20-minute exploring her experience as Spider-Woman, embellishing on the death of her Peter, and her post-Miles mindset, all in her gorgeous watercolor universe. And the way the movie is bookended with these interactions with her father really addresses her struggles and brought to a very satisfying conclusion. And the third movie might be Hobie. I want it to be Hobie, but it's probably going to be Kilometer Morales. I know, it's a dumb joke. Honest Trailers gave that name to Hobie? Why? Why do I love this shot? It may be obvious, but I really do love this unique homage to the famous upside-down Raimi Spider-Man kiss, because it embodies pretty much exactly what Spider-Verse is, taking something reminiscent of classic Spider-Man, but the execution and context is completely its own. It also unintentionally represents Miles and Gwen's similar but inverse character arcs, both ultimately wanting to be part of a team so much that they sort of preemptively jump when the situation prompts them, but ultimately when challenged, Miles needs to learn to be strong enough to stand on his own, and instinctive loner Gwen needs to learn how to open up and trust people before she can be part of a proper band that supports each other rather than just a follower. However, while it looks so romantic and emotionally intimate, the two aren't actually seeing each other. Gwen in a very literal sense because Miles is invisible, but she is thinking about him, but probably not in the way that Miles thinks, because he isn't really seeing Gwen. He's seeing his interpretation of her. Miles' feelings were certainly part of the teenage boy romance variety, but it's also because Gwen is a stand-in for the rest of his multiverse friends as a whole. In the first movie, he was the fledgling. He was the one still getting a grip on his power, still in the process of figuring out his Spider-Man, while everyone else had already embodied their own Spider-Sona. Also, because Gwen is older and, on first appearance, appears secure in her spider role, he also looks at her aspirationally, as now he currently struggles with his Spider-Man real-life balance, and Gwen appears again with the utmost confidence, seeming to have figured everything out completely, along with other signifiers of maturity like staying over at male friends' universes or having a steady job at Spider Central. Miles may indeed want to be with her, but just as strong, he wants to be what he interprets her to be, an adult who is respected, in control, and not confused. Except that Gwen, in reality, is none of those things. In reality, Gwen is much closer to Miles' level of uncertainty, but as somebody who is older, is in denial about most of it. Gwen jumped to join the Spider Society, particularly following one role model that also seemed admirable and cool and mature and had everything figured out, but mostly following a literal mother figure right as her own family rejected her. But since she made that choice, she now has to follow this family, because now they're all she has. But in this moment, Gwen is not saying goodbye to Miles because her spider mommy told her so. Gwen is tearfully saying goodbye because she knows. She knows what is going to happen after she leaves, knowing that even if she had the opportunity to come back, she won't, because she will now never be able to face Miles, knowing that she could have warned him about what was coming and didn't. Why does Spider Society follow Miguel even when it results in sacrifice? There's a lot of mental layers to this. For one, this is exactly the nature of the establishment that Hobie has a bone to pick with, as it initially looks like a cooperative of hundreds of well-meaning independent agents. But it's not. They are literally Miguel's soldiers who follow Miguel's orders. To clean up, what I expect is really Miguel's problem. Establishments or industries whose job it is to literally manage people, especially in regards to life and death, will inevitably have a dehumanizing effect on those people within it. People just eventually get narrowed down to numbers and data, and it all just becomes a math problem to save the maximum amount of people regardless of how. An effect impressively on display when we see the Spider-Man in the therapist's office, crying about the death of his Uncle Ben, as the therapist can't even pretend to care anymore. They have heard this so often. But despite only being 1 in 1,000 universes, this is still a devastating loss for this Spider-Man, and his pain is very real. But here's an important questionable detail. When do you think many of these spider people learned about the canon rules? Do you think somebody told them before they experienced said tragic events? Because if they had known, a lot of them probably would have reacted exactly like Miles. And a common occurrence that happens when somebody experiences loss or tragedy is the need to justify it. For there to be a reason that this happened. This couldn't be just some random happenstance. The universe must have let this happen for a reason, and Spider Society gives them that reason. Because while none of them would admit this, it probably also alleviates some of their guilt over not being able to save them. It wasn't that I wasn't strong enough or fast enough or smart enough to be able to prevent this. This was just fate. This was the canon. I couldn't have done anything. And in the grander reality, that is certainly true. No one, even people with superpower, can realistically save everyone. But if suddenly someone came in after you had made peace with this fact and goes, oh, your entire system is wrong and corrupt, fate isn't determined, in fact, they actually probably could have been saved if you had just done something different, or if you had tried harder, or thought of another way around it, suddenly that opens all of those old wounds and old doubts and that guilt about whether or not you could have saved them if you had been a better spider person. I want to believe that I have been doing the right thing all the time, so all I need to do to go back to that life is to shut the person up that's causing me to doubt myself. But that's even going by how many of these spider people even fully understand what is currently going on, and whether or not they've just been in this system so long that they literally will just do whatever Miguel tells them to do over a speaker system. In fact, there's a genuine question on exactly how does Spider-Man have been in on this the whole time. How many have been playing nice in front of Miguel, considering that another theory for Beyond the Spider-Verse is that it's going to feature Spider Society going against its defectors, which wouldn't be much of a fight if Hobie hadn't been making some more allies. Because Pavarti himself says that when he sees the captain is in danger, he says that he wants to do both. So maybe he merely doesn't know, or maybe he also is determined to break this pattern. I actually think it would be funny to learn that several spider people have actually been saving their Stacys and fudging the data. Why would they keep that secret? I think it's because they know something's up. Like, someone once confronted Miguel, hey, we saved our Caffin and nothing bad happened, and then he was never seen again. Is the canon real, and is Miguel right? Well, clearly the end of the trilogy would be a bummer if he was. The real question is Miguel merely compensating for the fact that he just doesn't know what he's doing or he's causing it and pretending that he does and making it worse? Or is this a more deliberate deception from a more malicious act of not merely replacing the dead Miguel, but also intentionally killing him to take his place? Currently, the most convincing theory is one that works in either case, is that his taking the place of dead Miguel O'Hara contradicted that universe's existing fact that Miguel O'Hara died by suddenly being alive. Miles didn't resurrect Peter, Peter passed on the title. And it didn't contradict anything that already existed, which would also serve Spider-Verse's usual meta-commentary, making Miguel that toxic fan who fixates so much on superficial details of how things should be, including the Spider-Man needs to be tragic rhetoric, and in the act of imposing his own ideals and desires on an existing story, ruins it for everyone else, instead of just letting stories play out and stand on their own even if they're messy. Or even really now that the constant dimensional hopping, which it seems that Miguel at least partially started, is causing the barriers between dimensions to collapse, which itself would be a meta-commentary of too many multiverse stories. Why did Miguel tell Miles about his father's fate? Easily the biggest critical nitpick of the film, with the common counter-suggestion of sending Miles on a mission during the canon event so he can't interfere. So why didn't Miguel do this? Honestly, because it's not a very good plan. For the dominant reasons that Miles appeared out of freaking nowhere in Mumbattan, no one saw that coming, so no one thought they had to deal with him. What were they gonna do? They could either keep someone who didn't know anything continue to not know anything in his own dimension and the chances of him interfering are already pretty low, or bring character into the organization where even if you distract him, you have to tell him some of the mission and give him a watch, where he might put some of the pieces together, especially when some of the members are his buddies. Also, Miguel believes that he's already too dangerous as an anomaly to be trusted with anything. Okay, but why did he tell him about the 2 days? Honestly, this is probably Miguel's biggest brain fart, because he absolutely did not need to tell him, except that Miles asked, and probably would have kept asking until someone told him. Sure, Miguel could have made something up, even the 2 days could have technically been a lie, but aside that, in movies, audiences really hate being told wrong information because having bad character lie is too much of a narrative cheat. And we did ultimately need to establish this for future plot reasons. The more relevant fact is, it really doesn't matter. When if Miles didn't fall his line, he was just gonna put him in prison. There, out of the way, simple. He would have figured out what he did after the fact anyway. Miguel did not need to put himself through that much trouble. Why would he orchestrate an elaborate distraction plan with so many possibilities of going wrong, and he had no way of believing that Miles would be able to break out, not when it was capable of holding all these villains from across the Spider-Verse? I think that people suggest this because it would have been fun to watch him go on another mission in another Spider-Verse and have the information leaked rather than, expositioned in our faces, and that's true. But ultimately the film did need a moment that characterized Miguel, and we needed a quieter character break between action scenes C and D. Yeah, for as much as Miles said that Gwen shouldn't have come to see him, Gwen dropping in is literally what messed up the whole plan. Are Gwen and Miles going to end up together? Whether anyone believes that Gwen could ever be forgiven for not warning Miles, fact is worse crimes have been forgiven. Ultimately, they are on the same side and obviously will fight alongside each other, but also it's Hollywood and what exactly do you think is going to happen? But I sure hope it isn't a one conversation kind of fix, as his sense of betrayal must run pretty deep. For all of the buildup of how close they were at the beginning, by the end of Across, Miles has detached himself from Gwen in multiple ways, in the literal sense from her help, but also breaking from the aspirational image and trust of her, because the minute he gets home, he does the literal opposite of his advice to her and comes out to his mother. Still, Gwen herself says that in every universe, Gwen falls for Spider-Man and it doesn't go well. So just given the level of emphasis given to this phrase, it seems like a foregone conclusion that in a story that is ultimately about questioning the canon or questioning fate, that when the canon is more often than not set on screwing Gwen Stacy over, so getting together with Spider-Man would be a great signifier to tell the canon to go f*** itself. Except what does doesn't end well mean? Sometimes it just means being pushed aside for MJ, which doesn't definitively mean her life is unhappy, but other times it's dying, and then being cloned by a creepy stalker, and then dying again. So it's understandable if Gwen Stacy doesn't exactly want to roll that dice. But exactly at what point are we confirming or defying the canon? Because there is in fact a comic where Miles and Gwen are going to get together, as in endgame grandkids together. A lot of people expect that they'll get together because that comic exists. In fact, this shot may even be foreshadowing it. But then would that mean that they are defying the canon or confirming it? Also, she's only broadly referring to Spider-Man the title, so she could be referring to getting together with literally any Spider-Person, including herself. But it certainly would be very powerful with Miles, who is himself considered an anomaly, and defying the canon with his existence. But what I also suspect, given that there are some vague rumblings about a solo Gwen Stacy film, that it will be highly hinted that they get together eventually, just maybe not right now. I do think you can make a satisfying ending where they part on good terms with a very close bond is possible, but yeesh, the amount of people say they better get together or I'll be so mad! And finally, just because I thought it was interesting, what's the significance of the Comics Code Authority sticker? Old school comic fans have merely called this an old deep cut, just a thing that's there because it's something all old comics used to have. However, I think a lot of people don't actually know what this is. This is not a publisher's logo, it's not a store tag, and it's not the equivalent of the Nintendo Golden Seal. The Comics Code Authority is a censorship tag. This was the comic equivalent of the Hays Code or the Movie Production Code, with many of the same restrictive rules on what movies and comics could and could not do, just short of being as bad because at least the comic one didn't outlaw interracial relationships. Literally the symbol of a higher power telling comic writers what they could and could not do with their stories. But one of the significant rules was that it could not show members of authority as being criminal, nor criminals as being sympathetic. And this is on Spiderverse, which has already violated both of these rules. Now, maybe it is just a deep cut for Spider-Man fans specifically because supposedly it was an issue of Spider-Man that featured a sympathetic depiction of Norman Osborn's drug addiction that didn't get the practice canceled, but generally agreed that it started its downfall. But I find it hard to believe its use is only surface level given the themes of the second film, and I have a feeling in the third one, when it appears, it will either be ripped away or graffitied over. Of course, I loved this movie, and of course it's going to win Best Animated Film of the Year, unless of course Hayao Miyazaki's magnum opus is that amazing or Wish blows people out of the water. The early reactions are apparently positive, but yeah, unlikely. Still, if you guys have any other Spider-Verse questions you want my take on, if I'm interested, I might make a short out of it. Until then, tell me what you guys thought of Spider-Verse Animaniacs. At this point, the release date for Beyond is indefinite, and honestly, given that they apparently didn't have anything about this movie finished, when Across came out, literally take all the time you need. We waited 5 years for Across, and it totally paid off, so take your time and pay your animators.